Hello humans, I'm Batsy, and today we are going to be transforming this entire perimeter into a fully developed town. This is the last week of the event, so there is a lot of work to do and very little time to do it. But this presents the best opportunity to do something a bit different for the video. I think it's quite common for YouTube videos to be like, I spent 100 days building this massive castle, or I made a giant fortress in the end. That kind of big projects are super cool to watch. I'm personally a big fan of Trixie Blocks videos, which are mainly creative building at massive scales. But they always have one issue in my mind, and that's that when it's in survival, gathering materials is fairly boring and makes for very poor content. Smallish Beans, for example, he uses the gathering segments as an excuse to make a comedic bit. Or, like right now, for example, I'm using the gathering part as an excuse to explain my point. And my point is that unless there is a bigger reason for it, gathering materials is boring to watch. And then there is the part of building it. If you show the entire process of building a big project, it would take hours and hours, and that would completely kill the viewer retention. Plus, time-lapse are always cooler to watch in general. At least I always enjoy a well-done time-lapse. Of course, there are always exceptions to everything I just said. At this point, you might be thinking, all right, Batsy, I get what you are saying, but where are you going with this? Well, I thought I would take the chance to show and teach a little bit how to tackle big projects like this, and how to be more efficient with the build and your time. Assuming you are on a time frame, just like this event is, which we have one last week to finish. The ideal first thing to do is to come up with a color palette that will be used for the entire town. One of the biggest time sinks when building in Minecraft is constantly thinking and coming up with what blocks to use in every little corner. It's much faster to pick a few basic blocks to use for the bigger areas and simply do gradients and texturing from there. For this town, we have been mainly using oxidized copper for the roofs, so I will stay with that. We are already using bricks for the roads and stone for the sidewalks, so I will go with mud bricks and scoria for the walls, which should contrast with the streets enough. And I think I will continue with the spruce and acacia for the corners. By now, some of you might have realized the next point, which is that you should try to stick to materials that are viable to farm. We are in an area that spawns a lot of mud naturally. That makes it easy to build with it. Stone and bricks are also very common things to get, especially with the Create mod. It is fine to add more variations later. For example, if we are working with deep slate, maybe we can add some blackstone to it later. But deep slate, it's so much easier to farm than blackstone, so we still want the main parts to be made off deep slate instead. A random example, but you get what I mean. Look for easy-to-farm materials to cover the bigger parts of your project, and leave the harder ones to farm for the details and the texturing. These two things will represent most of your time consumption, especially when not planned properly. The next point is not fully knowing what are we going to do. We know we are making a town, but then we need to decide on each house and all of the little details of everything. Many people like to color code it and just do the first layer of the house with different colored walls. I personally prefer building the roads first, as we saw in the last episode. From there, I like to fill up the gaps with the houses I'm going to build, just the first layer, but using the blocks we already decided we wanted to use. All of these are going to be houses anyway, so there are no big reasons to color code them. This will help immensely with knowing what scale we are working on. It's quite a common mistake to more or less guess the scale of things, then start building and realizing that it's a lot bigger or smaller than we thought at first, which leads to having to replan the project or redo sections of it to accommodate. Every minute we spend on planning is time we could have been building instead if planned properly. And obviously, assume that not everything will go perfectly, but by taking the ideal steps, what we are trying is to minimize the wasted time, not necessarily remove it entirely. The most important thing when laying out the houses and buildings is that not everything should be terraformed. It's important to adapt to the terrain so the town feels more natural. That's how we can achieve more variation without even trying. If only a small house fits in the last spot, then a small house should go there. And the same goes for every little space and cranny you can find. Don't hesitate to fill them all up with anything. Maybe we will build a random stall, or just a signpost or something. Now that we have the layout, it's time to make one single house. I tend to take an average-sized one and see what I can do with the blocks I've selected. This is basically to draw a basic example of what the style of the town will be. It doesn't need to be super detailed for now. We just want to know the proportions and scale we're working on. Whether it's going to have a flat roof or a pointy one, and all of those things. For this project, I will be going for some weird mix of desert houses with mud bricks, but also half favela style with connected roofs and whatnot, and a few different sizes going on. To explain, because that makes zero sense. Hulk is 3 blocks tall, or almost. I'm a bit over 1 block tall, and then 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐬 is normal sized. My idea is to build houses that fit all our sizes. To achieve that without making a massive mess, I just thought that it would be fun to make something like a favela and build some houses for the size of Hulk, with a random tiny house connected to it for my size, and maybe stuck on the side of a taller house the size of 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐬. Something a bit chaotic and hard to move around, but that hopefully shows clearly the difference in sizes. I think that would make a lot more sense than just having one massive house, and then a tiny house on the side, and then a random middle house too. I don't know. If they are separate houses of random sizes, I think that just not gonna look great. I think this house is looking alright, so what I'm going to do next is move this design into the SMP and just keep laying out the rest of the houses, mostly the walls and roofs for now, to really get the feeling of the chaos and the sizes we're going to work with. It's much quicker to work with the general shapes until we are happy with what we have, instead of having to redo the walls all of the time. And something that helps me a lot when building things like this is to not stress too much about what I'm doing. I'm making shapes here and there without paying too much attention to what that will be later on. There is no need to plan every single corner, so long as you can work with anything you have and figure out on the spot what to do with the corners you have left. You can make a balcony or a random terrace, or just put some plants in there. Most of the time, you can put anything on any corner, and if it looks good, then it's gonna look good. Don't worry if the build doesn't make real-life sense. The idea now is that since we have the basic shapes we're working on, we want to fill up the gaps and adjust whatever needs to be adjusted. If we made something a little bit too narrow or too wide, now is the time to polish those structural details. But just like before, don't worry too much about the details or what each corner will be. All we want for now is to make sure all of the shapes are consistent and the walls look good. And always sticking to the most basic blocks from our color palette. We will be adding details and texturing later on. I went ahead and added a minimal amount of detail to some corners to remember later on what I want to place in there, mostly the things that aren't necessarily buildings. But aside from that, it's looking pretty good. Yes, it's lacking detail in many areas, but that's fine. Now that we have the base structures, we can take our time to add some details without having to constantly plan and worry about what to do on the next step. Everything is already done. It's just a matter of replacing blocks and making it more detailed. For me, it's a whole lot easier to come up with a couple of details to fill up a corner than having to plan for the last 3 steps we made, but on top of that, having to consider what will be on its surroundings. All it's left to do now is to grab a ton of materials and start decorating all of the walls. To go from something like this into something like this. quite a fun project to work on and quite a cool video to produce. I honestly enjoyed the music aspect of this video a lot. I hope the humans had fun watching, and if anyone is interested in watching the full tour of the town and also the other towns from the other members of the SMP, Happy will be streaming a world tour on Monday afternoon at 6 p.m. CET, which is European time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all for the next one.